While you're layering on a $400 Gore-Tex parka and still feeling the bite at 10 degrees Fahrenheit, some people spent entire winters at minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit wearing animal skins and never shivered. That sounds impossible. We've been told for decades that synthetic fabrics represent the pinnacle of insulation technology, that we've graduated from primitive hides to advanced polymers. But the measurements tell a different story. Traditional Inuit caribou clothing achieves thermal insulation values nearly 3 times those of modern expedition gear while weighing the same or less. The people who engineered survival systems for the harshest environment on Earth weren't working with inferior materials. They were working with physics we've forgotten. Your winter jacket felt warm when you tried it on in the store. It performed well on that Colorado ski trip when temperatures dropped to 5 degrees Fahrenheit. The online reviews praised its extreme cold protection, and the tag promised performance down to minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Most technical winter clothing is tested and rated for conditions where roughly 80% of consumers will use it. Short duration exposure in moderate cold, with the assumption that the wearer will return to a heated shelter within hours. Manufacturers test at minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit because that covers most recreational winter activities in North America and Europe. People lived year-round in environments where minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit was a mild day. The Inuit, Dene, and Sami spent months in temperatures that routinely hit minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit, with wind chills driving effective temperatures far lower. Their clothing wasn't rated for weekend trips. It was engineered for continuous habitation in conditions that would kill an unprotected human in minutes. Thermal resistance is measured in kilo units. 1 kilo represents the insulation needed to keep a resting person comfortable at 70 degrees Fahrenheit. A business suit provides about 1 kilo. Standard ski gear reaches 2.5 to 3 cloaks. Specialized military Arctic uniforms, loaded with the best synthetic insulation available, barely achieve 4 cloaks at weights exceeding 4.5 kilograms. When researchers measured traditional double-layer caribou parkas and pants using these same standardized tests, they found values between 7 and 12 kilo at 3.5 to 4.5 kilograms. The gap between 4 CLO and 12 CLO separates survivable from comfortable. It separates technology designed for controlled exposure from technology designed for life itself. Between the minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit, where modern testing stops, and the minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit, where people actually lived, 3 catastrophic failure modes emerge that only reveal themselves when synthetic materials face true Arctic conditions. Gore-Tex and similar waterproof breathable membranes work through microscopic pores in a polymer film, each small enough to block liquid water droplets, but large enough to allow water vapor molecules to pass through. The vapor transmission relies on a temperature and pressure differential across the membrane. Warm, moist air inside the jacket naturally wants to move toward the cold, dry air outside. This system performs well in temperate climates. Rain stays out, sweat vapor escapes, and the wearer stays dry. At minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit, the pores ice over. Water vapor from your skin travels through your base layers and hits the membrane. The moment that vapor contacts the frozen membrane surface, it crystallizes. Ice forms across the microscopic pores, sealing them completely. Breathability drops to 0. You're now sealed inside what functions as a plastic bag, and every subsequent bit of moisture you produce condenses on the inside of your shell layer, soaks back into your insulation, and the system begins to fail. Brain-tanned caribou hide operates on a different principle entirely. The tanning process, working emulsified lecithin from brain tissue into the collagen structure of the skin, doesn't create a membrane with microscopic pores. It creates an open fiber network where individual collagen fibers are coated with lipids but not glued together. The gaps between fibers are macroscopic, visible to the naked eye when you stretch the leather. There are no pores to ice over because there is no membrane. Air and vapor move freely through the gaps between the collagen fiber bundles. The aldehydes from wood smoke cross-link the lipids to the protein, creating a permanent treatment that doesn't wash out and doesn't rely on temperature differentials to function. When researchers measured moisture vapor transmission rates, brain-tanned hides showed consistently high airflow regardless of temperature. The material cannot be sealed by ice because the pathways for air movement are too large to be blocked by frost. The vapor moves as gas through the leather before it has a chance to condense. Modern membranes are engineering marvels for their intended use case, but that use case doesn't include survival at -40 degrees Fahrenheit. You're hiking across the tundra in your modern synthetic puffer jacket, moving hard and generating heat. Your body produces water vapor through respiration and perspiration. The vapor travels through your base layer into the insulation, polyester batting, or down feathers. Inside that insulation exists a point where temperature drops from your body heat to ambient cold. This is the frost line, the dew point where vapor hits its condensation temperature. In a thick synthetic jacket at -35 degrees Fahrenheit, that frost line often occurs inside the batting itself. The vapor condenses. At these temperatures, it doesn't stay liquid. It freezes into ice crystals. Those crystals accumulate within the insulation fibers. Over hours, the ice clumps the synthetic fibers together. Over days of continuous wear, the batting can become a solid mass. When insulation loses its loft, it loses everything. The function of batting, down, or fleece is to trap air in tiny pockets. Air is what insulates, the material just holds the air still. Compressed, wet, or frozen insulation has no air pockets. It becomes thermally conductive, actively pulling heat away from your body. The problem is invisible. You can't see inside your jacket to watch the ice forming. You might notice the jacket feeling heavier or less warm over time, but you can't diagnose or fix the problem in the field. The ice is trapped inside the batting, unreachable and unremovable until you can fully dry the jacket, which in continuous Arctic conditions might not be possible for weeks. The traditional Inuit double-layer system engineers the frost line to occur in a specific, controlled location, between the two parkas. The inner parka is worn with fur facing inward against the skin. The outer parka is worn with fur facing outward toward the elements. Between them is an air gap, held open by the structure of the fur itself. Vapor from the body passes through the inner fur layer and enters this air gap. As it travels outward, it cools. When it hits the inner surface of the outer parka, the skin side, which is colder, it condenses and freezes. That ice forms on a surface you can access. At the end of the day, you remove the outer parka and turn it inside out. The inner surface is covered with a layer of hoarfrost. You take a stick or bone tool and beat the parka. The ice falls off in sheets. The outer parka is now dry and ready for the next day. The inner parka, which stayed warm against your body, never accumulated frost. This isn't fighting physics. This is acknowledging that in extreme cold, moisture will freeze somewhere, and designing your system so it freezes where you can mechanically remove it. Down feathers are extraordinary insulators by weight. A down jacket can achieve impressive warmth while remaining relatively light and packable. Down has been the gold standard for lightweight insulation in sleeping bags and jackets for decades. Down is soft. When you sit on a rock, lie on the ground, or lean against a tree, the feathers compress and flatten completely under pressure. The air pockets collapse. Where there's compression, there's zero insulation. If you sit on snow in down pants, your backside will be cold within minutes because you're sitting directly on ice with no insulation between you and the ground. Caribou guard hairs have a different structural geometry. Under a scanning electron microscope, the hair shaft reveals a vacuolated medulla, a honeycomb interior of air cells surrounded by keratin walls. The hair is hollow, but not in the simple sense of a drinking straw. It's a complex matrix of tiny chambers, each separated by structural walls. This makes the hair mechanically rigid. Each hair functions as a tiny beam with impressive compression resistance. When you sit on caribou fur, the hairs don't collapse completely. They bend, but they maintain much of their structural height even under load. Laboratory tests show caribou fur retains 60 to 70% of its insulation value under compression, compared to down or synthetic batting, which can lose 90% or more. Thermal conductivity measures how easily heat moves through a material expressed in watts per meter Kelvin. Still air has a thermal conductivity of 0.024. Caribou fur measured across the full thickness of the hair layer is approximately 0.031, nearly as good as pure motionless air. Solid polyester fiber has a thermal conductivity around 0.14. The caribou hair insulates 4 times better per unit of thickness than a solid synthetic fiber of equivalent diameter. The lack of melanin pigment in much of the hair's interior creates another effect. Infrared radiation from your body, instead of passing straight through the fur to the outside air, scatters off the irregular surfaces inside the hollow chambers. The radiation reflects back toward your skin. The fur doesn't just block conductive heat loss, it reduces radiative heat loss through internal scattering. When Inuit hunters sat on ice for hours, waiting at seal breathing holes, they maintained insulation even in direct contact with frozen surfaces. The clothing performed in the exact conditions where modern gear fails most dramatically. Modern base layer theory is built on wicking. Hydrophilic fibers pull moisture away from your skin through capillary action and spread it across a larger surface area where it can evaporate. Polypropylene, merino wool, and synthetic blends are designed to move sweat away from the skin as quickly as possible to prevent that clammy feeling and the conductive heat loss from wet skin. This works at 20 degrees Fahrenheit while skiing. Your sweat moves into the fabric, spreads out, and evaporates into the air or continues moving outward through your layers. You stay relatively dry. At -40 degrees Fahrenheit, sweat can freeze before it wicks. The moisture doesn't travel through the fabric as liquid. It crystallizes on contact with the cold fabric. You now have ice crystals forming against your skin or within the first layer of fabric. Even if the sweat remains liquid long enough to begin wicking, the outer layers of your clothing are so cold that the moisture freezes as soon as it reaches them. The wicking process doesn't eliminate moisture, it just moves the problem from one layer to another, creating ice throughout your entire layering system. The traditional approach doesn't try to move liquid moisture through fabric. It prevents liquid moisture from forming at all. Caribou guard hairs are stiff and stand away from the skin. They don't lay flat like fabric. When you wear an inner parka with fur facing inward, only the very tips of millions of hairs make contact with your skin. The contact surface area is minimal, much less than a fabric base layer pressing against your entire skin surface. This creates a boundary layer of air directly on your skin. The air layer allows water vapor to move as gas, not liquid. Because the vapor is in a gaseous state and surrounded by relatively warm air from your body heat, it doesn't condense immediately. It continues moving outward through the fur as vapor, traveling through the air spaces between the hairs. By the time the vapor cools enough to condense, it has traveled through the inner fur layer and into the air gap between the inner and outer parkas. There it freezes on the inside of the outer parka, far from your skin, where it can be mechanically removed. The system doesn't wick moisture, it manages vapor. The fur creates microclimate control at the skin surface, allowing moisture to escape in its gaseous form before it ever becomes a thermal problem. Modern winter jackets use zippers for ventilation. When you're working hard and overheating, you unzip the front of your jacket to dump heat. This exposes your chest and abdomen, your core, to the full force of the wind and cold. The temperature regulation is binary, fully sealed or dramatically exposed. Pit zips attempt to solve this by adding ventilation under the arms, but they still require conscious decision-making and manual adjustment. You have to stop, reach across your body, and open or close the zips. If you're wearing a pack or pulling a sled, access might be limited. The traditional Inuit parka is a pullover with no front opening. The hem is loose, the seal point is at the neck and hood. This creates a chimney. Hot air is less dense than cold air. As your body heats the air inside the parka, that air becomes buoyant and rises. It pools in the shoulder and hood area, creating a zone of positive pressure at the top of the garment. The bottom hem, being loose, creates a zone of neutral or negative pressure. When you want to vent heat, you loosen the drawstring at the hood opening. Hot air rushes out the top of the chimney. This rapid exit of air creates a low-pressure zone inside the parka. Cool air is drawn in through the bottom hem to replace it. The air flows up through the parka and out the hood in a continuous convection cycle. Your core never gets exposed to wind, your chest and abdomen remain covered. The airflow is distributed across your entire torso rather than concentrated at one zipper opening. The system is self-regulating. The hotter you get, the more buoyancy the air inside the parka has, and the more vigorously it vents when you crack the hood seal. When you stop moving and want to retain heat, you simply tighten the hood drawstring. The seal closes, convection stops, and the parka returns to being a static insulation layer. The second automatic system is the Bellows effect. Because the parka is cut loosely and hangs heavy with fur, it swings as you walk. Each step creates a pendulum motion in the garment. This motion pumps air in and out of the hem opening. Walk faster, and the parka swings more vigorously. More swinging means more air exchange, which means more cooling. The ventilation scales automatically with your activity level. Stop walking, and the parka settles and stops pumping air. These aren't conscious design choices someone made by sketching airflow diagrams. They're emergent properties of a loose, heavy pullover garment with a seal at the top and an opening at the bottom, properties discovered through generations of use and refined through iteration. The result is passive climate control that requires no intervention and creates no vulnerabilities. Every stitch is a hole. When you sew two pieces of leather or fabric together, the needle punctures through the material, creating a pathway for air, water, and heat to escape. Modern outdoor gear addresses this with seam tape, strips of adhesive waterproof material applied over stitching to seal the holes. The tape works, but it adds weight, stiffness, and a failure point as the adhesive ages and begins to delaminate. Inuit seamstresses used Sinew thread, dried and shredded backstrap tendon from Caribou. Sinew is hygroscopic, meaning it absorbs moisture from the air. When sinew thread is dry, it's thin and hard, almost brittle. When it absorbs moisture, it swells. After sewing a seam, the needle holes in the leather are surrounded by sinew thread. In dry conditions, the thread occupies minimal space in the hole. When snow touches the seam or when humidity from your body reaches the stitching, the sinew absorbs that moisture and expands. The swelling thread fills the needle hole completely, creating a gasket that seals the puncture. The seal only activates when needed. In dry cold, the stitching remains thin and flexible. When water is present, the thread swells to block it. The system is self-regulating and requires no additional sealing materials. Modern polyester or nylon thread cannot swell. The synthetic fibers are hydrophobic. They repel water rather than absorbing it. Every needle hole remains a permanent leak. The thread itself might be strong and durable, but it provides no sealing function. For waterproof seams in boots, Inuit seamstresses used an overcast stitch technique where the needle enters the leather, turns within the thickness of the hide without puncturing all the way through, and exits on the same side. The needle catches the edge of the second piece of leather and pulls it into a join. The stitch never creates a hole that penetrates from the interior to the exterior of the boot. This requires working with thick, pliable leather and precision. The needle must turn within the dermis layer without breaking through either surface. Modern stitching machines can't easily replicate this level of control. Inside the mukluk, soft-soled boots made from bearded seal and caribou leg hide, the insulation is removable. Dried grass or moss forms an insole that absorbs foot sweat throughout the day. The grass is hygroscopic, pulling moisture away from your foot and holding it within the plant fibers. At the end of the day, you remove the grass insole. If you're in a warm shelter, you dry it by the fire. If you're in a tent or igloo with no fire, you take it outside and let it freeze solid, then shake the ice crystals out. Either way, the moisture is removed from the system. You replace the insole with fresh or dried grass, and the boot is reset for the next day. This is modular design. The insole is a consumable, replaceable component like an air filter in a vehicle. You don't try to make it last forever, you accept that it will absorb moisture and need replacement, and you design the system around that reality. Modern boots have sealed liners. The insulation is glued or sewn permanently inside the boot. When it gets wet, you can't remove it, you can't dry it efficiently, and if you're on a multi-day trip in extreme cold, you're walking around in damp insulation that's losing its thermal performance. The grass insole system acknowledges that feet sweat, accepts that moisture will accumulate, and provides a simple mechanical solution: remove it and replace it. Modern technical outerwear is designed to serve multiple purposes. A jacket marketed as extreme cold gear needs to work reasonably well in a Montana winter, a Norwegian ski resort, a Canadian city, and a Colorado mountain. It needs to be light enough for backpacking, durable enough for daily wear, and affordable enough to hit a consumer price point. It needs to pack small and last a few seasons before the customer buys a replacement. These are market-driven constraints, not survival-driven constraints. The result is a generalist garment that performs adequately across a range of conditions but isn't optimized for any specific extreme. Traditional Arctic clothing was designed for one environment: continuous habitation in the coldest places humans have ever lived. There was no need for the parka to work in Seattle rain or pack into a small stuff sack. It needed to keep you alive at minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit for months at a time, allow you to hunt and work without restriction, and be repairable with materials available in the environment. Durability measured in decades, not seasons. The engineering constraints were different, and the solutions reflected that specificity. A double-layer Caribou parka isn't versatile. It's hyper-optimized for terminal cold with the assumption that the wearer understands the maintenance requirements and has the skills to perform them. Modern gear design assumes passive use. The wearer is expected to put on the jacket and let it do all the work. The insulation is static, the ventilation is manual, and the user isn't expected to maintain the garment beyond occasional washing. Traditional gear assumes active participation. You remove and beat the outer parka to clear frost. You replace the grass insoles. You repair tears with sinew and a bone needle. You know how to adjust the hood drawstring for ventilation and when to loosen the hem for airflow. The gear is part of a larger system that includes your diet, your movement patterns, and your understanding of cold weather physiology. This isn't a failure of modern design, it's a reflection of different goals. If you're designing a jacket to sell to millions of people with varying needs, you can't assume they'll remove and beat their coat daily or replace organic insoles. You design for low maintenance, broad appeal, and reasonable performance across conditions. That approach hits a wall in true Arctic environments. The compromises that make a jacket marketable also make it inadequate when the temperature drops below the tested range and stays there for months. 3 principles emerge from traditional systems. First, design for the worst case, not the average case. If you're making gear for extreme cold, optimize entirely for that. Don't compromise insulation for packability or weight savings that won't matter when you're fighting hypothermia. Second, make failure modes visible and addressable. If frost is going to accumulate, put it where the user can see it and remove it, not hidden inside batting where it destroys performance invisibly. Third, prioritize repairability over planned obsolescence. A torn seam that can be stitched in the field is better than an intact seam that fails catastrophically when a zipper breaks or a laminate delaminates. Modern materials science could apply these principles without requiring caribou fur and brain-tanned leather. We could design synthetic insulation that sheds frost mechanically. We could create modular insulation layers that can be removed, dried, and replaced. We could engineer garments with passive ventilation systems that work through convection rather than zippers. We could prioritize compression-resistant loft over packability. The market wants gear that's good enough for weekend trips in moderate cold, light enough to backpack, and cheap enough to replace every few years. Traditional systems were optimized for continuous survival in the most extreme cold on Earth, built to last a generation and maintained as part of daily life. The question isn't whether we should all wear caribou parkas. The question is whether modern design can shift from generalist compromise towards specialist excellence when the environment demands it.